Because they never aired a single public service announcement.
Asteroid.
Ever since. The small seed of the cannabis plant is a highly nutritious food and also produces a high-quality, multi-purpose oil. Its stalk is the source of a durable fiber which helped provide the raw material for clothing the earliest human communities.
Hemp probably is the oldest crop of multiple use benefits to humankind, as far as we understand it. You could eat it, and you could wear it, to say the least.
Hemp seed is the #1 most nutritious food you can put in your body. Gruel is hemp seed and water. Entire civilizations have subsisted on it in times of famine.
The smoking or ingestion of the budding parts of the cannabis plant for their euphoric effects has also played a part in our history as social custom, medicine, and as a religious ritual.
The Scythian warriors coming out of Mongolia and the steppes of Europe over there.
Ancient Egyptians believed certain rituals had to be carefully and endlessly performed to prevent the world from succumbing to terrifying chaos.
With it in their pouches, alongside their weapons and their horse.
Cannabis sativa has been used all over the world by a wide variety of cultures.
It was well in the future. For us, it is frighteningly soon. Mayan calendars tell us the world will come to an abrupt end on precisely December 21st, 2012. Today's religions still ponder
and the oil that came from the plant, whereas other cultures were more interested in using cannabis sativa for other more personal uses or cultural purposes, and that would be those varieties that have
themselves again and again. They believe in time cycles that are much longer than we can even conceive of.
At the end of each Hindu cycle, the world will be consumed by flame and a new creation will emerge from the ashes. Fortunately,
the funniest things were the little differences. For example, in Paris, they have flying monkeys.
Their true motivations presents a unique challenge. By its very definition,
I puked in your seltzer.
Why, that's a terrible joke.
And what that truth is.
It's a kind of pseudo-scholarship. It has the form of real scholarship, but it doesn't follow any of the logical rules that are required by scholarship.
Although there are hundreds of
threatened to cut off their supply. With the establishment of colonies in North America, the English were eager to introduce the seed and strongly encouraged the colonial farmer to plant hemp alongside his other crops. Key to their enthusiasm.
Although many of these groups have a public face and diverse membership roles, conspiracy researchers
and rigging so important to the British Navy. Hemp was excellent in this regard as it resisted the corrosive effects of saltwater, and when it did begin to fail as rigging, it was picked apart and used for caulking the hulls of the wooden ships. Hemp was an essential commodity for a nation which wished to
publishing phenomenon. Their latest is the 12th in a series that has sold over 60 million copies.
Very slowly in colonial America. In the South, it lagged behind tobacco, which became a very profitable article of trade for the colonists in Maryland, Virginia, and the Carolinas. Despite
some Christians believe this rapture defines a holy moment when Jesus will suddenly remove from earth those who believe in him.
Her borders. The early shipbuilders along the northeast coast, whose industry had always been dependent on imported hemp, saw the value of a ready supply of good fiber on their side of the Atlantic. George Washington, a hemp farmer himself, saw great potential for the Virginia farmer, but lamented the glut of foreign fiber, mostly Russian hemp, in the colonial market. Despite the many years of inducements and
pinpoint when the world's first secret societies were formed, cuneiform tablets from the Sumerian civilization may
for new and greener pastures, the more adventurous citizens of the new nation began to leave their homes along the eastern seaboard and follow the wilderness road through the Appalachian Mountains, or sail down the Ohio River into the rich, abundant lands of the West. The stories of the rich rolling lands and flowing waters of the central plateau of Kentucky enticed many across the mountains, as did the generosity of the Virginia legislature, which offered to deed 400 acres to those who would make settlement in Kentucky by building a cabin. As added incentive, those who planted corn would receive 1,000 more.
Land was being worn out back in Virginia. There were all sorts of political and social problems.
Civilization.
They were the people that built the fantastic structures like the pyramids and stuff with knowledge that a primitive people would never have been able to do.
The reason is filled with what some see as proof that the end is near. Books, movies, songs, videos, magazines, and simple rumor all prod our deepest fears.
Neal in Boyle County, and he grew a small crop, not for sale, but probably just for home use.
Hemp can be grown in a wide range of climates and conditions, but factors like the length of the growing season, soil quality, amounts of rainfall, and proper drainage are critical to the strength and length of the fibers the plant will produce. The dark, fertile soil and mild seasons of central Kentucky seemed particularly well suited to the task, and produced tall, healthy stands with strong fibers and a minimum amount of wood in the stalk.
If you direct plant seed in the soil, it comes up, it's a weed, just like tobacco.
We don't know the day nor the hour that Christ is coming back, but we do.
It's a vigorous plant, and the way we raise it, it's so thick, it'll outgrow all the other weeds and kill them. It shades them, and they die.
The plant's natural hardiness and resistance to disease helped it proliferate on the frontier, despite the primitive farming methods. A farmer could sow as much seed as he had available, and in a good season be assured that he would have a substantial crop in just a few months.
For their expenses.
For nearly 200 years, the Knights Templar gained hundreds, perhaps thousands of members from the
commodity for farmers who could exchange their crop in payment for needed goods. In 1788, the first newspaper in the West, the Kentucky Gazette, established in Lexington the year before, offered to take bundles of raw hemp in payment for subscriptions. By 1800, Kentucky's log cabin economy had been transformed into a diverse and thriving agricultural economy, and the pioneers' little hemp patch had.
Medical authorities predict a major pandemic is waiting to spread disease and death across the world.
Could a major epidemic of influenza?
American hemp.
Crown heads of Europe up to their neck in debt to them.
In 1307, the Knights Templar are almost wiped out.
And our very existence is threatened by a terror from the stars over which we have almost no control.
On the quality of job performance. So the use of hard drugs.
You wake up, there's about a 1 in 20,000 chance that something a half a mile across or bigger is going to hit Earth that day.
Of all the world's religions, only
Oh, no, Dr. Burr.
And supernatural prophecies known as revelation.
I'm too scared to truly try to open my mind and will only smoke reefer. Is there anything I can do? Yes, there is.
Separate the
influence is enormous.
Of the 56 signatories of the American Declaration of Independence, 50 were known Freemasons, only one was known not to be.
Earthly life is coming to an end.
The Bible is true, and we can trust the Bible to be.
Along with the expansion of hemp cultivation, the manufacture of hempen goods had been progressing in the States since the days when the first settlers had spun crude hempen cloth on their spinning wheels as an improvement on the nettle lint and buffalo wool they had been using to make fabric.
The very earliest huntsmen came in here had to wear skins for clothing. Coonskin cap, everything they had on was coonskin. Leggings.
In the idea of the end of the world, particularly because of the specter of nuclear warfare. And for the first time,
they're going to wear animal hides until one of about 2 or 3 things.
And that particularly led to the rise of various cult groups.
In 1978, Jim Jones, the charismatic...
Or you can plant hemp.
Hemp was actually spun in the home. You could do the entire process to actually end up with clothing or textile fabric right in the home itself. The hemp might have been grown on the farm, and then of course you would do the retting or the rotting of the fibers, and then on to the hackling and the spinning, and then the weaving, and then making something into cloth. So that was easily done as a process right at home.
Cordage of various kinds was another necessity of frontier life, and smaller types of twine and rope could be produced at home without the aid of special equipment. As time went on, the demand for larger lengths and widths of rope for use in shipping and industry brought about the development of rope manufacturing sites known as rope walks. A rope walk was a long, narrow building.
When federal officials tried to enter the Davidian compound, Koresh took literally the words of Revelation. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire pours from their mouths and consumes their foes. Revelation.
Backward would twist the fibers around one another as they were drawn out of the bundle. The long yarns of fiber were in turn spun together for the desired width of rope. 2 events occurred in the American South in the 1790s which were to have a tremendous
that a UFO would rescue them before God destroyed the world.
It gave early traders much wider access to markets through the port of New Orleans. The second was the invention of the cotton gin. Prior to 1793, the use of cotton had
in American history. Today, the world is witnessing a new
king of the South.
Once you invent that little cotton gin, which is a very simple thing, once you develop that thing and then refined it and built large.
Blessed is the one who reads the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who take to heart what is written in it.
The creation of what we now call the United States.
Ike and others point to the fact that the
clothed the king. By 1802, 250,000 pounds of cordage alone was being shipped from the port of Louisville down the Ohio River to the Mississippi and on to New Orleans. In 1810, a visitor to Kentucky named Thomas Joines noted, "The inhabitants of Lexington now turn their attention almost entirely to the cultivation of hemp, for which they find their soil adapted and which is more profitable than anything else they can grow." It appeared to many that for as long as this mutually beneficial relationship continued, the hemp industry would surely prosper right alongside King Cotton. The early years of the 19th century also saw the expansion of the American shipbuilding industry along the Northeast coast, as well as the growth of the U.S. naval fleet. Both were large consumers of hemp for marine use. A 3-masted frigate like the USS Constitution required 30 tons
and dangerous living conditions created by poverty. But the force of natural threats can be very intimidating, and there are things...
In the West, Kentucky hemp was playing an important role in the development of the riverboat trade, but the large and potentially lucrative seaboard market to the east remained out of reach.
It was very difficult to transport it.
Something enormously frightening to us, that there's something that's beyond our control. Naturally, our minds race forward to try to come up with different end scenarios, different ways that the world might end. Some of these are based in science, and some of these are based in faith.
millions of Christians have become
topsy-turvy world, that is not saying in New York Harbor, look, this is the land of the free. What that's saying is, we're running the show, we're telling you, but you can't see it, can you?
I think it's all nonsense. It is nonsense that's repeated and acquires a certain reality because it's repeated decade after
coast. The Kentuckians saw their opportunity to become competitive and perhaps even replace the foreign suppliers in the eastern market. Led by their able statesman Henry Clay, the Kentuckians became great advocates of the tariff on hemp
and God's promises of paradise. Both troubling and uplifting, the Bible's final book was born out of oppression.
State legislator had a suit made out of hemp and fiber, and he appeared in the Kentucky legislature dressed in a hempen suit, advocating for the protection and production of the crop.
In spite of the efforts, the Kentucky farmer was never able to claim more than a modest share of the northeastern market, even at the height of protectionism. An underlying reason for this may have been
Jesus had been executed by the Romans. Nero had had his fun with the Christians in Rome, and it could happen again. So there's it's a kind of a black cloud hanging there, and you never know when it's going to rain.
Its armies have destroyed the
by most Navy men to be more consistent in strength and better prepared for market than its American cousin.
But with all the political clout that Kentucky had in Washington, Henry Clay and others, they were never able to capture.
Conditioned, imbued with these doctrines, and then placed into positions of power to carry out the agenda of the older secret societies.
The is today Turkey. His name has come down to us as John of Patmos, or St. John the Divine. In the face of continued and systematic Roman dominance and cruelty,
for anybody's hemp. If a golden age of hemp culture ever existed in America, the decades leading up to the Civil War could make the claim. In spite of its troubles, market forces and new technologies conspired to create a period of prosperity and relative stability in the industry, which lasted into the 1850s. The introduction of the steamboat in the early 1800s on the Mississippi and Ohio rivers had revolutionized transportation in the West and greatly increased the flow of commerce up and down the rivers. In the years that followed, American cotton became a prized commodity worldwide and kept the southern planter a reliable customer for hemp bagging and cordage factories upriver. Though market prices fluctuated, hemp cultivation remained a critical part of the economic foundation for Kentucky farmers, even as it expanded into the Midwestern states of Missouri, Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, and Kansas. During this period, Kentucky hemp continued to be the state's leading money crop, second only to livestock in returning dollars to the farm. In 1849, the state could boast that it possessed 1/3 of the nation's hemp factories. There were some 159 in operation statewide, producing bale rope, cordage, linen, duck canvas, bagging, and sailcloth. Production in the U.S. peaked in 1859 on the eve of the Civil War, with a bumper crop of 40,000 tons of raw, field-broken hemp.
the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him, to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent
of each class of skull and bones. Still, even though their identities were known, what they did inside the tomb was still supposed to be.
It's that you had to help enough to handle the crop. You didn't need them all year, but you certainly need them maybe at planting time, but desperately at harvest time.
Compared with the cotton-producing states, Kentucky's agriculture had remained more diverse in nature, keeping her less dependent on slave labor, at least directly. However, Kentuckians were actively involved in the slave trade, and many Kentucky-born slaves were sold to work in the cotton fields down south. With the outbreak of hostilities at Fort Sumter, the Southerners immediately declared an embargo on
intimidating kind of aura it had.
10 years after he graduates in 1968, Ron Rosenbaum,
especially the English, who were extremely dependent on cotton to keep their huge milling industry humming.
As a matter of fact, that was a basic factor in the Southern hope in the Civil War, that Britain would come in on the side of the South. Britain, however, had on hand, I saw the figures not long ago, enough cotton to run, I think, 3 or 4 years. So Britain didn't need the cotton. And that was a miscalculation on the part of the South.
The naval blockades and strict prohibitions on trade imposed by the North guaranteed the economic isolation of the South. For the hemp industry in Kentucky, its fate historically and literally tied to cotton, the war dealt a severe blow from which it would never fully recover. With the halt to all shipping of rope and bagging downriver, factories throughout the state
to spread through the Roman provinces of the eastern Mediterranean and on to Rome itself. Cities in Asia Minor
substitutes for use as clothing. In Kentucky, the practice of weaving hemp on old hand looms experienced a revival, and several factories were brought back into production, making cloth from both flax and hemp in the hope of cashing in on the scarcity of cotton. The war also increased the demand for ship sail and rigging, and the War Department attempted to purchase domestic hemp where it was available. However, with the disruptions to the workforce and supply lines, no one was
and growing Christian church. In the year 81 of the Common Era, Domitian became Emperor of Rome.
Ever changed the role
to what people have said who've had some experience of that secret society, the Skull and Bones. It is more than just a talking shop. It involves the worship of the skull.
A number of reports
and bagging sparked the hemp industry back to life. Prices climbed steadily to their pre-war high, and by 1869, Kentucky had regained her role as the nation's principal producer. It appeared to all that the good times had surely returned. But in fact, the cotton growers had never been completely satisfied with hemp as the solution to their transportation problems. The Southerners had long been unhappy with the cost of hemp and
on Christ's followers to give in to Roman cultural values at home and in the marketplace, to think of themselves
hoops with cheaper bagging made of jute from India rapidly displaced hemp in the baling of cotton.
Once you introduced steel ties into buying cotton bales, you killed off the market for bale rope, and just dead.
In the tomb's basement, one distinguished member serves as master of ceremonies. Once enrolled,
dropped by 90% to just over 5,000 tons by 1878, with almost the total amount coming from Kentucky.
Is he a paramedic or a smelly hippie?
Revelation chapters 2 and 3. But John...
It would all be rather funny if it weren't for the fact that among the former bonesmen are 3 presidents: William Howard Taft, George Bush, George W. Bush, numerous senators and ambassadors, industrialists.
So his hygiene is questionable.
Centuries, Skull and Bones has produced the stewards and leaders of the American ruling class, the Eastern establishment, elite, core of diplomats.
George checks out Luther's arms and looks into his dilated pupils and sees that he also uses.
Not for tow-homespun, fur-clad Kentucky alone. To make way for it, a forest the like of which no human eye will ever see again was felled. The roads of Kentucky, those long limestone turnpikes connecting the towns and villages.
The reason that it is so secret is because if the people of America realized what its elite presidents of the future get up to, they'd realized that
as a synonym for the end of the world. But that isn't the real meaning of the word.
The very first word of the book is the Greek word apocalypse, which means pulling back the curtain, unveiling something. And that's what Revelation does, is take us on a journey of unveiling. And what it's unveiling is the Roman Empire and its injustice. And then it's giving Christians a message of hope. It's showing
he could own his own pleasures also, all these depending in large measure upon his hemp, that thickest gold dust of his golden acres.
The beginning of the 20th century found American hemp a minor crop, with production limited to small regions in Kentucky and parts of central Wisconsin. The U.S. farmers still contributed a small amount of hemp to manufacturers of baling twine and thread, but the wide variety of low-cost, high-quality fibers readily imported from third world countries, like the Philippines and Africa, kept domestic hemp.
Debate over the meaning of these images has made Revelation the most controversial book in the Bible. Most scholars see John's writing
in American hemp, and production increased each year of the war's duration, but quickly waned with the return to peacetime.
He's where the historical Babylon was. He's talking about Rome. And if he's talking about various kinds of beasts, he's talking about emperors.
During the early 20th century, we began to see a lot more evidence that people were smoking various varieties of cannabis sativa that were specifically bred for their THC content. During this period, we had a lot of hashish coming over from the Orient, a lot of coca coming up from South America, a lot of opium coming from both the Middle East and again Southeast Asia.
Obscure and mysterious.
The book of the Apocalypse is immensely loaded with symbols
that were very, very different from the varieties that Americans were historically accustomed to.
Each time the United States enters into a world war, we rediscover
from the earlier scriptures.
John's readers were
Luther asked George how much money he has, nor has he seen George take out his wallet
to offer hope to the Jewish people. When the Babylonians conquered
to pay in advance. Had this happened, George would have grooved on. George,
you know, a cabal, then a kind of unconscious community of interests that people who have power.
President.
The perfect sense. It's not about symbols or code. It is about literal truth.
Cultivation of cannabis.
The operative part of the Marijuana Tax Act was a transfer tax, and for transferring it pertained to the leafy part of the plant, as far as the transfer tax, and there was a fee of $1 an ounce if it was to be transferred to a registered participant. But it was $100 an ounce if it was to be transferred to an unregistered participant.
Registered participants included the manufacturers of paints and varnishes who used hemp seed oil in their products, suppliers of birdseed, and the manufacturers of medicinal products such as corn plasters and various remedies used by veterinarians. Unregistered participants, it was assumed, would be marijuana dealers. Though it was alleged by the prohibitionists to cause unwitting citizens to commit violent crimes, the
I don't believe they're allegorical. I don't believe they're metaphoric. I believe they are factual. I believe that there will be 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that will represent.
These zombie parties sure.
It is a fear that sends a shiver of horror down the spine of all who feel it. A horror that our world
exemption for the stalk portion of the plant, requiring the few farmers still growing hemp to register with the Treasury Department. But a token payment of a
is with us because of the Council on Foreign Relations. A committee of the Council on Foreign Relations wrote the
tone. It succeeded largely because it circumvented any attempts for a true public or scientific debate on the issue. The prohibitionists deftly fused marijuana usage with the deep-seated racial fears and the isolationist tendencies of America in the 1930s, and the result was
beginnings in the last book of the Christian Bible. John of Patmos describes fantastic visions of the future of the world.
Uses and the recent development of improved processing machinery were about to bring the nearly extinct crop back into the limelight, replacing
and began to take Vietnam as his top priority. He was surrounded by what he
a scroll that contains God's plan for the future of his world. As Jesus opens the seals, the verses of Revelation present
on 178,000 acres of prime farmland.
On foreign relations is David Rockefeller. He brings together some of its most powerful members with elite private citizens from North America, Western Europe.
4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Each of these terrifying.
The situation threatened to limit not only America's buildup of military forces, but also impede the growth of wartime agricultural production.
It was desperately sought to help save the life.
Director Bert Lance, and I asked him, well, what's the deal about the Trilateral Commission? And he simply smiled and he said, I was the only member of the cabinet that was not a member, and now I'm out.
And they found out those little U-boats, 2-man German subs could shoot a hole in the ship, but it wasn't too damnish big. So if they take a hemp rug and drop it over the side, they could pump enough to save the troops' lives.
By the spring of 19...
poured out, and each time the bull is poured out, another disaster happens.
There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth.
To grow the fibers so vital to the war effort. A corporation, War Hemp Industries, was put in place to purchase the crops and manage the operation of some 70 processing sites proposed for speedy construction in Kentucky and throughout the Midwest.
George Bush does become president. His State of the Union address in 1991 contains a 3-word phrase that
a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 crowns.
Being imported from British East Africa, and U.S. stockpiles of fiber began to return to acceptable levels.
People, language, and nation. Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 and 2.
It's a figure that controls everything.
Production quickly decreased as foreign fibers began to dominate the market once again.
Influence, and in some cases are powerful, but they're not meeting with the goal that they're going to act in a unified way.
Those who survive will be forced to show their allegiance by being branded on their right hands or foreheads with
agenda is raised by the fact that although these groups
plant. As the war came to an end, the crop which had been cast as both criminal and war hero looked as if it were headed toward extinction once again.
After World War II, because the U.S. government had reauthorized industrial hemp production, although it had failed to a certain extent in terms of helping, quote, the war effort, several farmers continued to raise industrial hemp for commercial purposes through the 1950s and even into the early 1960s.
My frog skin is black. My soul is black. The empty moon must laugh.
I am cursed by the gods to exist. No one may see my face.
We are creatures of ambivalence. We sleep in our tombs.
I am man's fate, from which there is no escape.
I will run away on fallow birthday.
Rome
3,800 members of the Council on Foreign Relations, says he speaks from experience.
I am pristine contamination. Tell me, atheist, where is your God now?
You are the darkness that smothers fragile sparks.
You are a slippery eel, forever struggling to be untangled from a net.
The frogman and welder are natural enemies. They must detest each other as they wait to die.
Seed to seed.
True secrecy comes in.
But the evidence, say conspiracy theorists, is
Become the largest of all crops in America, but it's treated horticulturally rather than agriculturally.
Exactly where it came from, and how it got to be a part of our society from the '60s on it's unclear. Some people theorize that it was the
that has been the scene of many battles throughout biblical history. The beast's armies shall gather at a place Revelation calls Armageddon. This famous battle site that John predicts for the future actually exists in modern Israel today.
Very serious questions.
and the one group with the best track record for implementing the policies of this secret elite, according to conspiracists, is also the world's most
Har Megiddo.
We're standing up
for a joint. They really suppressed it. They didn't want all these soldiers discovering THC and coming back here, having discovered it, saying,
Who are the Bilderbergers, and what is the purpose of their annual secret retreat?
I don't think war. Their inability to control the Vietnam War was also mirrored by their inability to suppress this plant with the soldiers when they discovered it over in Vietnam. And so they bought it back and turned on my generation to it. I was turned on to marijuana by a very good friend.
The meeting is held in secret, and they decide to make the conference an annual private retreat, which continues to this day.
The Bilderbergers are the most secretive of the modern secret societies. They're so secretive they don't even have a name, much less publish a membership list or anything like that. Now, some of the members are known because they've been observed at their meetings, and some of the members have talked and mentioned some people, so we do have an idea of who attends the Bilderberg meetings, which are heavily under guard.
Past glory and future revenge to any Christian audience that
for legalization of drugs. And completely immoral when he uses the taxes of these same constituents to pay the expenses of the fight against their vote to legalize drugs. Well, I sure have egg on my face. I guess in the case of politicians, some things are completely evil.
One weekend a year. They usually take place in some Western European country. Every 4 years, I think they take place in the United States. They're nearly always at resorts.
Was spent by the federal government to fight the war on drugs, and an additional $33 billion was spent on the state and local level. Future generations watching this film might not be able to appreciate the meaning of that number in today's dollars. So here's a handy aid. Suppose Congressman Bob Barr wanted to hire a male prostitute off the street. If he used the entire United States war on drugs budget to fund his hypothetical deviant behavior, he could receive oral sex 2.5 billion times before he'd have to use his own money. But if Bob Barr isn't using government money on hard liquor and prostitutes, where is it all going? Much of the federal dollars has gone towards the creation of propaganda.
Bilderberg watchdog. At the 1999 conference in Portugal,
patriotic or just go ahead and be crazy.
In the 1960s, it was a really interesting time period because there were two different cultures that were running.
In which the lion shall lay down with the lamb, men will beat their swords into plowshares and study war no more.
In the last chapter of Revelation's great story, with the final
suburbs with the polyester suits and the synthetic life of two cats and a dog in the garage and the whole bit. And then there was the counterculture, who was really
for God and his Son. Those who have forsaken God's laws will join the devil in hell for all eternity, but the faithful will receive their reward.
Of chemicals like speed and acid, for example. But there was also a very strong movement at the time to move into the natural things of life. So at that time, people began to be very interested in marijuana, also very interested in natural clothes, cottons, flaxes and linens and silks and wools, things that were more consistent, I think, with their kind of back to the woods, simple lifestyle.
Hemp, like tobacco and so many things with farmers, is...
The United States population is in prison, and mostly for drug crimes. Don't you think we should spend more money on treatment?
Sure!
But God had no sooner delivered his amazing prophecy for the future than men began.
You know, Paco, I'm a little troubled by the egregious abuses of human rights caused by your Colombian army.
Oh, si, senor. It saddens me too. Perhaps you could look the other way if, in addition to executing the people who oppose our dictatorship, we all...
To a man in Canada whose parents were from Hungary. He went back to the villages they came from, and they grind up the seed and make hemp butter, just like we have peanut butter.
Eyed look comes across. The what? And yet, the major people, they are reporting every day on members of an organization.
It's just like soybean meal. You feed all the animals. So, history, the book's full of it. It's a matter of, can we think we've grown so wise?
One of the first and one of the few to challenge the literal reading of Revelation.
Which is not to say that Augustine did not believe that the last...
Illiterate. That all of a sudden the crop is all bad. And the phenomenon is, when you're eating popcorn, corn makes whiskey. You don't really think about that when you're eating popcorn, though. Or if you like real good sweet corn in the springtime.
There are always going to be surprises.
You don't have to speak the language to be able to interact with people.
Plant can make anything out of.
It's the paper that the Constitution is written on. I used to put up hay with hemp string, by far the best string. The plastic stuff is just terrible to fool with.